You know, you might explain why it's in the seller's best interest to pay a full fee. Henry Ray, who had owned Ray and Company and became the president of First Real Estate as well, had, if I can get him to speak with me, we're going to edit in some of the dialogue that he has, because Henry had a great way of explaining this to sellers, why it was in their interest to pay the higher fee, and why it was in some other agent's interest to cut the fee and buy their business that way, hoping that somebody else would sell the house and make up for their inabilities. You know, one way to address it, if a seller came to me and said, Jim, we'd like to list with you, but William says that he would he'd cut the commission, 5%. Will you do that? You might, maybe I'll respond and say, well, let me ask you a question, Mr. Seller. Williams wants to cut the commission 5%. If he's willing to give up probably what's 1/3 of his commission to him, simply because you asked him to, let me ask you, how long do you think he would hold out and fight for your equity? The point being, if he roll over for his money, you can bet he's not going to hold out and be a good negotiator and be helpful to helping you, Mr. Seller, recover and gain more of your money, gain greater equity. That person's not able to negotiate on the seller's behalf. Maybe another response. I like this one from a trainer he said, well, when the seller asked me for a commission discount, he would look at him and say, there will always be a place for those who cannot afford premium service. And then just be quiet. You'll find when you're working with people that there are people who focus on saving a fee, and they lose even more in equity. And sometimes when you see those people, you've got to just, as I said before, throw the little fish back. You can waste a lot of time chasing that kind of business. And this can happen both on the buying side and on the selling side. In the early 80s, times were bad. And when mortgage rates went up in the teens, people that had a house didn't move unless they really had to. They might have been a transferee and they'd move. Or perhaps they just, a growing family had exploded out of the walls and they needed to have more space, even though they had to jump up their interest rate. And so I started looking for people who wanted to buy or sell investment property. Usually the owner would hold paper, and you wouldn't have to go get a loan in the teens. The owner would hold the paper at usually somewhere in the 10 to 12% range, a very satisfactory number. And one day I was looking in the paper, and I had learned to work the numbers, and from reading the rent numbers I could tell the values of apartment buildings. And there was a 4-unit apartment advertised for the price of $50,000. And with the rent numbers they gave there, I could tell the house was the value on the income approach would have put it at the $75,000 price range. And so I called the lady and asked about the apartment she had advertised in the paper. She told me that with great pride that she had, and glee, that she had sold the house to the first person that had called her already that day. And she pointed out to me that she had also saved my 7% commission. So she saved about $5,000. She gave away $25,000 in equity to save that $5,000. And you'll find that there are people who focus, it's like people who look at the wrong end of the telescope. They focus on the wrong number, and many people only focus on cutting you out, saving that commission, and neglecting the benefit of what you do and the outcome and how you add value to the transaction. I had a baby doc. The young doctors would move into town, and they'd always want to live within just a few minutes, as close as they could get to UAB or Southside, and they come in, do a 3-year rotation, then move on to where they begin their practice. And this doc had his house listed for sale up below the club for at least one listing period before he came to me. And he'd had it listed for $69,000. Well, that was just a little bit above what he'd paid for it 3 years earlier. And this was a time when houses in Homewood were galloping forward in price. The long and the short was that he had bought the house for upper 60s And he had thought he'd saved himself a lot of money by cutting out that real estate agent's fee. What had actually happened, he had tried to save the same fee that the seller was trying to save. Two people can't save the same fee, and it's usually the seller who's saving it because the buyer does not know the market. And usually the seller is less motivated and sticking their toe in the water, but to a buyer who does not know better, he focuses on saving a fee and he pays too high a price. And we sold the house for $64,000, which, here's a guy who probably should have made $20,000 in equity during that time, and in actuality lost a few $1,000s in equity. So he focused on the wrong end of the telescope, and so many people do the same thing as well. Next, though, you've got to be, in terms of price, you've got to be able to differentiate yourself from a discount real estate agent. If you can't differentiate yourself, do you really think it's logical for a seller to want to work with you? Let's try it this way. If after class today you go out to your car and you turn on the motor and you look down the gas gauge and you see that, wow, my gas tank's nearly empty, I need to fill up or I won't make it home. So you look at your alternatives down the street and you say, well, there's a Shell station over there for $4 a gallon. $4 a gallon. And then there's an Exxon station a block or so down, it's $1.25 a gallon. Which one are you going to fill up at? Now, occasionally there's a genius in the class who says, I'm going to go to Shell because it's closer, but that's not the way it works. In reality, most people make a rational decision. They want the lower price product. Now, that's because it's undifferentiated. Gas is gas is gas. Gas is typically an undifferentiated commodity. So if you've got a choice between $4 gas and $1.25 gas, most people are going to pump it full of $1.25 gas. Now, it's just common sense. Now, if I told you, if I differentiated the two products, I say, okay, now the Shell over here at $4 a gallon is high, but you'll get 60 miles a gallon on your SUV. The Exxon down there is really a better price, but you'll have to have your motor rebuilt by the time you get to the end of the tank. Which one are you going to choose now? Normally, the class says, I'll pay $4 a gallon. It makes sense. What changed? We differentiated the product. And so you have got to differentiate yourself. Brokers have got to differentiate themselves. And if you can't do that, again, a seller is either related to you or foolish or both to work with you when there's a cheaper competitor down the street who can do just exactly the same thing that you say you can do. The same principle applies to brokers. We at Realty South do not pay the highest starting splits. There are people that sit in a class, who sit in this class, and since I don't know what our split will be at the time you watch this, I won't be specific, but who can go across the street, who can go to the next block and find brokers who will offer a significantly higher split. Now, either our agents are making a logical choice being here or not. It comes back to, it's the same principle. It comes back to, did you make a logical decision to work for, say, 55%? Why would it be better to work for 55% at one company than 70% at another? I can explain to you a couple things just from personal experience. Starting off as a baby agent, age 22 years old, with a small mom-and-pop Century 21. But after about a year and a half, I realized I have two selling jobs here. I have a selling job of me, a young kid, trying to make his way in the real estate business, and a guy selling, explain who the Century 21 company is, Mom and Pop Realty. Or I can go over to the large company over there. Nobody needs to know who they are. Everybody knows. I don't have to sell that company. I've just got to sell me. That makes sense because it's like the old barbershop joke with the dumb boy who they always offered. They said, would you rather have this large nickel or this little bitty dime? And the child always picked the nickel because it looked bigger. And that's the same, maybe the same choice you've got to make. But if you don't think you've made the right choice at Realty South, then you need to go get that big nickel down the street. Similarly, if you had a choice between buying a Lexus or a Kia at the same price, which one are you going to pick? You would choose one over the other because of quality and a variety of other factors, other benefits the car that the Lexus provides. Next, I'd ask you, while we're on antitrust, to think about why you would blame a competitor from competing with you on the basis of price. I mean, why do brokers compete with us on the basis of price? It's simply because you have to. And you'd better get a lot higher split at a company if you're going to have to get a 20% lower commission. It's the same thing. It's the same principle on commissions and splits. A few years ago, let me say it this way. A few years ago, a great agent with us left, became a partner in another company, and gave us some feedback after he'd been over there. He said, when I compete against my old cohorts at Realty South, I find that when I go head-to-head with your top agents, I can hold my own. But when I go head-to-head with your baby agents, I find I'm losing more than my share. That's counterintuitive. Most of us, if we had a choice between competing with Betty Lou Big Hitter and Jane the baby agent, we'd always want to compete with Jane the baby agent. So what could be true about why he'd rather compete with the top agents, and why would he be less effective competing with the baby agents? Well, this is always a fun part of the class. We sit there and they speculate on answers because it's interesting. Sometimes they get some good insights. But the answer was that he said typically your top agent has to, they have a long track record, and they like to lay it all out there. I'm Betty Lou Big Hitter, and look, I've sold these houses. Here's my record, and I've been the $1 billion club, and they talk about, it's always about me, 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 me. Well, the baby agent, when you get to selling houses, what are you going to have to talk about? Me, me, me. You're not going to have anything to talk about, so you're going to sell what? You're going to have to sell team. You're going to have to sell company. You're going to have to sell our tools, our benefits, features, functions, things that are really fundamental things. He said, I can compete because I have the track record. He said, but what I don't have is all the fundamental tools that the Realty South agent has. I don't have the web page. I don't have the millions of eyeballs going and looking there. I don't have the leads that come off that, the business. I don't have other brokers sending buyers to my site, maybe getting stuck there and doing business with us. I don't have the largest buyer pool in Alabama. We don't have he says, I don't have the free home warranty during the listing period. And on and on and on, the benefit of doing business with Realty South that most people forget about. But as a baby agent, if you sell those things, it will help you be competitive no matter who you're competing with. Now, also as a young agent, you've got to sell what you have to sell. Since you don't have the track record, you don't have the all the experience, you've got to look at what you do have and go with that. It's embarrassing to think about how hungry I was competing with old elderly people at 35 years old or 40. They're married. Maybe they had a second income. I would sell pity. I mean, if I didn't sell the house, I'd tell the seller I was more motivated than they were because they just wanted to move. I wanted to eat. And probably shouldn't have told that. I had a baby agent whose mother had gotten into real estate a couple years earlier. On her first listing appointment, she went and told the people, if you'll give me this listing, I will treat it like it's my only listing. She got the business, and it was her first and only listing. So you've got to sell what you have that way.